Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, What ChatGPT Won't Tell You About Virtual Chief Information Security Officers, or vCISOs. A few things for you to know. Livestorm begins all of our webinars with your sound on mute. So if you can't hear us, click on the screen to turn on the sound. Your microphone will remain muted, but please use the chat to talk to us. We really want to hear from you. And if you're a frequent flyer, we would love to hear from you in the chat about where you're typing in from. If the alerts are too much for you, you can mute them by clicking on the bell on the right-hand side, and know that you will automatically get a recording. But if you want the presentation slides, please email ellie.miller@criticalinsight.com. She is hanging out in the chat here with us. And so throughout our presentation, please make sure to type any questions that you have. We're going to leave time at the end to do some Q&A. Today I have with me two esteemed speakers. First, Mike Hamilton, who you probably recognize from all of our different webinars that we have here. Mike is, after a career in the private sector and after serving the government as the CISO for the city of Seattle, he founded Critical Insight and serves as the CISO here. Mike is frequently quoted about major cybersecurity issues in the media, such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, SC Magazine, Newsweek, and more. Lastly, he was also voted CISO of the Year by the Global InfoSec Awards held at the annual RSA conference. I also have with me Brad Swanson, who is a security professional with Critical Insight. He has been in the cybersecurity field for 29 years and currently specializes in vCISO, audit prep, security awareness training, and more. He has presented at many security conferences and enjoys talking cybersecurity with anyone who will listen. He is also into jeeping around the desert, so that's a lot of fun. I will also be your event host here today. My name is Virginia Case, and very excited to have you here with us. So without further ado, Mike, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So why do we call it this? I think we're all starting to lean into, this assistant that we have now, generative AI. ChatGPT is, the one that everybody knows about, so we thought we'd throw that in the title. You can ask it questions about security. You can have it write things for you. The results are starting to look like you need to take them with a grain of salt. So we thought we'd compare, hey, what does it say versus what we would say? There's a lot of folks out there doing this virtual CISO thing, and there's not a lot of detail about what they do. And in fact, I've seen statements of work where it's just, well, we're just going to give you this many hours of professional services and you do whatever you want with that. That's not really what you should be expecting. Really, when we did the ChatGPT version, it was a bit on the expansive side. And so we thought we'd kind of narrow that down. Brad, here's what ChatGPT tells us. What do you say about this?
Yeah, so it's really very broad what ChatGPT does list here. ChatGPT is fed information. It's a large language model, so it's gathering information on what a virtual CISO is going to do from many different organizations, many different sectors, and it lumps it all into one. So it's going to tell you that we're going to do, strategy work and risk assessments and compliance and regulatory adherence. And granted, these are things that we do. Using the compliance and regulatory as an example, the regulatory requirements of a hospital are much different than the regulatory requirements for an energy company. And that is much different than the requirements for a manufacturing org. It's going to talk about things like incident response. Yes, vCISOs can assist with that, but maybe you have an IR team locally and the vCISO just kind of oversees that. Excuse me. There's a lot of reporting that goes on, a lot of monitoring. So really, when you ask ChatGPT, it's going to give you the everything but the kitchen sink, and sometimes even the kitchen sink as far as what a vCISO is. Not every org is going to need these things, though. It's going to be kind of piecemeal.
Excuse me. So when we're talking about it being expansive, you had mentioned a few of these things, but maybe expand on it a little bit more, like we asked ChatGPT not to.
Right, sure. So, the items on the previous slide really kind of make up an entire mature security program. And as a result, it's going to require participation and buy-in from multiple groups in the org. The vCISO is not going to be like a one-person team. They're going to rely on these other teams. They're going to help run and manage your security programs. But the vCISO can't always do all of these tasks single-handedly. Kind of like a captain can't do every job on a large ship. They're one person. They can't run an entire cruise ship. You're going to need to work alongside, senior leadership and legal and HR and other teams within the org. In addition, each of your organization's security maturity is at a different level. We really like to say that, security is not a destination, it's a journey. And we're all at different points in our individual journeys, right? And then finally, the required tasks are going to differ between sectors. Again, what a hospital needs is different from what a water treatment facility needs. Each of our needs are kind of unique, and it's very important for us to identify those needs early on. And that's what's going to make a vCISO successful for you is applying needs specific to you.
And I love what you said about those needs being customized. And Mike, why don't you walk us through some of those customizations that somebody might be looking for?
Yeah, well, so let me just double down on what Brad said, because if you asked generative AI to do a job description for somebody that you wanted to hire on a part-time basis, and that's what you came up with, you're not going to get anybody in that role. You're definitely not going to get anybody in that role. So here really are, as boiled down as possible, all the things that need to be done in a mature security organization, right? If you're, especially if you're regulated, all the regulatory requirements say essentially the same thing. There are things, if you break it down, tasking for things that are weekly, right? You need to have rituals where you're going through, vulnerability scans, and you bring your team together and you talk about threats that are extant that we may want to start addressing that are new. There's things that need to be done monthly. You need to get your vulnerability scans done. You got to review firewall rules. Quarterly, you need to do things like access authorization reviews, right? Making sure that everybody is authorized to the assets that they have access to. That's actually got to be done on a quarterly basis, and it's all got to be documented. So if you're regulated, the auditors are going to come in. They're going to look for all of these things. Importantly, there are annual tasks, and every quarter, a couple of those things need to get done. Now, a virtual CISO is not going to do things like conduct a penetration test. There should be no expectation that somebody comes into that role that they're going to have that kind of skill. They may have had it in the past. I used to do it a long time ago. It was a lot easier then. But really, it's more of a management and a strategy position. So when we talk about some of that customization, it's important to evaluate what regulatory requirements are really there, or what standard of practice you'd like to align with. And when I say a standard of practice, there's the NIST framework, right? NIST cybersecurity framework, which is voluntary. Anybody can pick that up and use it. And a lot of the reasons that these things need to get done is because now your insurance company is requiring it, or your business associates are requiring you to show your papers, show your security papers when they're doing their third-party, risk management. And so customizing these tasks to an organization that may or may not be regulated, yet has these other drivers, is a bit of finesse. And there are some things that you might not have to do if you're not Lockheed, but there are going to be things that are expected of you. Again, insurance companies have become the de facto regulators for everyone now, and so insurance companies are giving you this, you have to be at least this cyber tall to get insurance from us, and they're not all the same. Different insurance companies are asking for different things, although they're kind of focusing on the 10 top things that they want to see in place. If you are able to say, we are conducting an annual risk assessment, and we're using those results to form a corrective action plan, and we've budgeted for the gaps that we want to fill, and those are on our corrective action roadmap, you're going to be great. You're going to be in great shape. If you fail to do a biannual tabletop exercise, it's probably not so bad, although more and more that's becoming required. So there's a little bit about customization and how this folds into regulatory requirements, but really this is kind of the roadmap here for what you ought to be doing and what your virtual CISO, if you don't have, somebody who's responsible and accountable in that role, will be managing.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mike. And I'd like to call attention to the chat for a second. Mark, thank you so much for submitting your question. We're going to get to that at the end, but everybody should be like Mark. Please submit questions. We want to get to your questions here inside this webinar. All right, moving along. Reasons for outsourcing this role. Brad, tell me about this.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of talking back to what Mike just said on the previous slide, regulatory requirements are evolving at a rapid pace, especially around things like risk management. It's really critical that your leadership be involved in that risk cycle, right? For a long time, security has been sort of a black box. Nobody's been able to kind of see inside. We need to change that. We need to make sure that we're telling everybody, hey, here's what's going on. Let's be transparent. Let's get everybody involved, because it's going to make it that much easier to address it. You should be in regular communication with your board of directors as well. Keep everybody on board, and it's going to make life better. Third-party risk management is getting to be a big thing. A lot of third parties that maybe you're dealing with, they want to see your SOC 2, or they want to see that you are complying with security as a best practice. So you're going to need to be able to show that. These are things that a vCISO can drive. Candidates are in short supply, so outsourcing this role can solve a few issues that we are seeing in the wild. The shortage of qualified and experienced CISO candidates is a big one. CI is actually working right now to help improve the pipeline of qualified security professionals by supporting our PISES program, where we start hands-on training with folks while they're still in college, so that they hit the workforce with actual real-world experience and not just book knowledge out of a book that was written 10 years ago because of how fast security changes. If you want more information, you want to learn more about what we do with PISES in the colleges, you can go to the CI homepage. There's a link you'll be able to find that'll tell you more about PISES. We do have a link at the end of the presentation as well that you'll be able to jot down on that to learn more. CISO experience can also vary greatly. So it's important to find somebody with experience in your sector, or at least a similar sector. If you are a power plant, here we have NV Energy. If you work for a power company, you don't want to bring in a CISO that only has maybe hospital experience. You want somebody that kind of understands NERC-CIP versus HIPAA, or PCI versus NERC-CIP, depending on what your needs are. And then there's the cost. The cost of the CISO is climbing steadily. Some CISOs that I know that I interact with in some of our CISO forums, they're getting close to $500,000 a year just in salary. And that's before the costs we don't often consider, benefits, equity. Those are all part of the total cost of compensation. Vacation time, that sits on the books as an expense. So you really need to kind of look at it holistically as to what that total cost of compensation is. And then finally, you might not have enough work to justify a full-time CISO with, a golden parachute and equity and everything else, but you still need somebody to help steer the boat when the boat's out in the water, right? So that's why a solution like a fractional or a virtual CISO would make a lot of sense.
So Bart, it sounds like there's strategic roles in this. Mike, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the part about more and more regulation is requiring somebody to lead this effort in organizations. And the SEC came out and said, okay, we want 4-day mandatory reporting, and everybody freaked out about that. But if you read the entire text of what they're asking for, they want governance, right? In the what's called the HICCUP, which is for the healthcare sector, the HICP. They say they want governance. They want executive fingerprints on risk management decisions. And so, helping an organization to put together some kind of risk governance to be compliant with those, what are emerging as regulations, right? They're all in the sector-specific regulatory agencies, and so you need to be in a regulated sector, but they're all converging on the same thing.
Thank you. Brad, back to you.
Yeah, and it's very important, the whole risk governance piece. And in the olden times, the security people would take care of the risks, and that was it. Leadership was not always made aware of those risks, and the problem with that is, the security team might not see the big picture, as it were, right? They might not know what direction leadership is taking that boat, and leadership can really give some really good input and advice on how to deal with these risks. We see that here at CI. We have our own internal risk governance committee, and they have some really good input to us as we're dealing with risks that are identified. There are some steps that you can take, that a vCISO can take to improve your security posture. Develop habits, right? If you keep doing something over and over, it's going to become a habit, and develop these good habits and rituals like standing meetings. It keeps the lines of communication open. It avoids these silos. So many times in the past, we've heard, oh, well, I don't know anything about that. That's HR. We have no visibility into what HR does. And HR says the same thing about IT, and everybody says that about sales. It's really good to break those silos down and keep those lines of communication open. Develop a risk management process that includes conducting risk assessments. You're not going to find risks if you don't go looking for them. You need to turn over the rocks, look for the bugs, look for the worms, do these risk assessments. And then as you identify these risks, take them to your risk governance committee, which should be made up not only of IT people, but also leadership folks, maybe somebody from the board. That committee will educate these risks and can review the disposition for each risk. These risks can then be handed out to the correct teams for resolution using those stand-up meeting rituals where we're breaking down those silos and working with multiple teams. You can discuss it and then correct those through those teams. And then very importantly, track and report the results of these remediations, not only for your internal knowledge, but if you have something that comes along, some regulatory group that comes along and says, hey, show us that you fixed this issue. Now you have it tracked and recorded, and you can show them, hey, this is how we're managing our risk.
Thank you, Brad. I know that we're talking here about tracking and compliance. So maybe Mike, fill us in a little here.
Yeah, so we'll just double down on this. We're talking a lot about regulatory requirements and the emerging guidance on governance. There's a reason that the version 2 of the NIST cybersecurity framework added a domain specifically for governance. That's what this is about. I think there are too many organizations still that think firewall and antivirus are going to do it for you. And in today's world, that is just not going to work. So being able to understand what regulatory requirements really do apply, as Brad said, the health sector is not the energy sector, is not the defense industrial base. And so while there's a lot of commonality across different regulatory requirements, there's a lot of nuance in there, especially with the cybersecurity maturity model certification that's coming out and being finalized next year for service providers. So if you do business with a company that does business with a company that does business with the defense industrial base, or probably any federal agency by that point, you are going to have to comply with CMMC. And so it's really about, this being a kind of a competitive differentiator for you. Your insurance requirements are going to have something to say about this. And it's depending on what tools you use, and we actually provide a tool, a GRC tool for our virtual CISOs to use. You can do an assessment against the NIST framework and crosswalk it against others, so that if your PCI auditors show up, you can do your your self-assessment questionnaire, or they can do their assessment for you, but use those results, and that speeds audits right along. The tasks that are outstanding, right? There's going to be gaps. Anytime you do one of these assessments against regulatory requirements or standards of practice, you're going to need to find those gaps, and you're going to have to get those scheduled. Sometimes that's just putting something on the calendar that says, in 6 months, we're going to have to hire a firm to come and do a penetration test for us. Right? So then it's scheduled, it's managed. Artifact collection is kind of a big deal if you are actually regulated and audited, because auditors show up and they ask you about your controls, and then they make you prove it. So it's important to be collecting those artifacts, and that's a good job for the virtualized top of a security organization to be tasked with. Right? You're going to make sure you're going to get us through this audit, and then assist with that audit, because the audit process is you submit a lot of artifacts, and then the auditors are going to come back and they're going to start asking questions about things. And so being available to answer those questions and be part of that process, also a big part of this role. So compliance and oversight depending on what sector you're in, this might be the main thing that you want to get out of a virtual CISO.
Thank you so much, Mike. While we're talking about sharing information, it sounds like education and advocacy. Why don't you take over, Brad?
Yeah, for sure. So, education is a really key part of security today. Again, we talked about how security used to be kind of a black box. It should not be like that. And it's very important as a vCISO that you get in front of, and this is kind of addressing, some of the comments in the chat. Mm-hmm. You don't want to only interact with the CTO or the CIO. You need to interact with the entire company. I often tell my vCISO clients that I work with that when I'm working for them, I'm an employee of that company. I'm representing that company, and I'm going to do my best to reach out, get to know everybody there. I don't want to talk just to the CIO or the CTO. I want to talk to the end users. I want to talk to the people that I can help educate on things, and they can educate me in return. It could be an end user saw a brand new phishing campaign that we haven't seen yet. When they mention that to us, okay, now we can dive into that. Whereas if we don't have that open channel of communication and education, you miss out on that. So you really need to make sure that you're communicating and educating as you go. This includes things like creating metrics for your executives, for the risk governance committee, for your board of directors. They might be asked a question by their peers. You want them to have the information and the metrics and the tools to be able to answer that question effectively, honestly, transparently. And develop messaging and training that's relevant to the specific groups in your org. This is users, it could be administrators, it could be your leadership team. It's very important that you give the tools to the people that need it. This messaging can be done just kind of openly on your own, develop your own content and provide it to the company. Or if you have like a learning management system, for example, use that. Help build that ritual of folks going to the LMS for educational stuff. Get them excited to go there and read it. Don't make it dry and boring. Make people laugh, make them smile. Security doesn't have to be painful. We can make it engaging and educational at the same time. And make sure that when you present information on new threats, be open and transparent when it comes to new threats and risk trends, but make sure that you're presenting the information in a calm and factual manner and include solutions. You don't want to generate FUD. You don't want to say, there's this huge phishing campaign. Oh my gosh, the world's going to end, because then people are going to panic. Well, you are interfacing with every tier in that organization. You need to keep in mind that some of the people you're interfacing with are not very technical. Some HR people I know are amazing HR resources, and they know HR law forwards, backwards, upside down. I have no clue on that stuff. So they can teach me that. I can teach them technical things, explain it in a way that they understand it without making them panic. So that's kind of a big thing around the education piece.
I love what you said about FUD, that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, something that people definitely play off of. So we also need to talk about client responsibilities, because it's not just about what the vCISO can do for you, it's what the vCISO needs from you. So Brad, keep going here.
Yeah, for sure. So the items on this slide are all key to a successful engagement. One of the things that I've seen in the past is a client will think, hey, we have a vCISO now, we can forget about anything security related, which is not the case. The company needs to continue thinking about security. Kind of going back to our analogy of a vCISO being like the captain of a ship. The captain can't take over the ship and then the engine room crew says, oh, we have a captain. Now we don't have to run the engines anymore because the ship just drifts away, right? So it's very important to make sure that the client doesn't just give up. The client still has responsibilities, even though they have a vCISO. Making sure that the budget is there for things that are needed, or to keep your AWS account paid up and current, whatever it may be. Security staff management. And this isn't just scheduling and making sure that they show up. There's other things, do you provide training budget for your people? This kind of ties the budget and the security staff management together. Do you send them off for any kind of training? There's a whole slew of training, everything from a $300 webinar to, $8,000 SANS courses and everything in between. You want to maintain your relationships, contracts and relationships. If you are the CEO of a company and you have a really good working relationship with one of your third-party vendors, keep that relationship going. Don't just say, oh, I've got a CISO, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. That's not the way to do business, right? Understand what the risks and accountability that the vCISO is telling you. Understand what they're saying and what that means. And if the vCISO tells you something and you don't understand, raise your hand. Say, hey, I don't really get it. Can you explain it in another way? Make sure that you're conducting operational security tasks. Make sure your firewalls are being reviewed, monitored. Somebody's looking at the logs for that. Make sure that security tools are being patched and updated and used properly. And then maintain those points of contact that you have for your external relationships as well. Don't just kill those relationships off. That's always good to have relationships.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit here too. I will say that in the chat here, the discussion going on about assisting in creating a culture of security, that is spot on. Being a bit of an evangelist to bring everybody kind of up to speed. My comment was, when you just expose people to the lexicon, eventually they get up to speed. And if people knew what was happening out in the world, they would be a lot more careful. And so just that constant reinforcement of look what's happening out there. Look what happened to a company that looks just like us. What I would add to that is, and there are engagements that I've done where they specifically just wanted me to mentor somebody to bring them up to speed to be their CISO. And that mentorship role, just acting as somebody who's senior, who's been around the block, telling stories, is a really good way to get the organization in a condition that it functions very well. And just kind of making sure that you're talking to the network team and the server team and the desktop team, and they all know who you are, and you're sharing information with them, and they, you want them to think that you're part of their team and that you're not somebody that's coming in here and just pointing your finger and telling everybody what to do, right? You're really going to try and integrate with that team. So that's, to me, I think that's a big part of the role as well. So I'm glad somebody brought up culture. I'm glad you talked about it, Brad, but that mentorship is something that I've run into that I think is actually a pretty important part of the job as well. So yeah, choose carefully. You really need to have somebody that's got some specific knowledge and experience in the sector you're in, especially, and this is especially true for the healthcare sector. It's also true for me, right? I'm government. I worked in government for about 10 years. You have to know about things like public disclosure and, the fact that all of the agencies report to the executive except the auditor that reports to the legislative branch. And there are things that you can leverage there. And in fact, Mark's on from City of Seattle. And I was recently at the Association of Local Government Auditors, where we told a story of how we work together, despite the fact that I was told never to do that. So, it is important to have this very sector-specific knowledge when you're going to go drop in like this. They're temporary, but you want to make sure that what they leave behind is going to be durable, that it's going to be useful way after the end of this engagement. Ideally, this is not a permanent thing, and you want outcomes after 1 or 2 years. And after that, things need to be kind of clicking on all cylinders, by themselves. Yes, with somebody probably assigned to be accountable and responsible for security, whether you call them the CISO or not, doesn't matter. But that framework that gets set up, you want that to live past the end of the engagement. Again, integrating with the IT teams. And it's not just the IT teams. Many times, and especially if you're in a very federated, like government or a large corporation, there are all of these different departments, agencies in government. And it's important that you have somebody in every one of those agencies that doesn't necessarily report dotted line to you, but can serve as kind of your eyes and ears. And there's certain deals that you can do. So for example, a dotted line organization, if you will agree to let this person attend my meetings, I will provide input to the annual performance review, which ends up being a good deal for everybody. So integrating into IT teams and across silos in the organization, want somebody that's able to do that. there's a lot of folks that have really a lot of experience that, maybe come from military background or something like that, and have a very specific way of looking at the world. The Orange Book. I don't know if anybody's still familiar with the Orange Book, and information classification and guidelines and requirements on where information can traverse based on how cleared you are, et cetera, et cetera. That's still the way a lot of people look at the world. And in today's corporate environments, that doesn't work so well. So you want to make sure that somebody doesn't have kind of a mindset that's too far back, and they understand the rapidity with which the world is changing right now, and how we're going to have to lean into that, and some things we're going to have to do differently. So again, I'll just say it in a different way. Not all experience is relevant. They need to know what you need them to know. And if you can take this information that we're given today and come up with, here's what we want to get out of this, and know that a priori going into a relationship with someone who's going to deliver this kind of work, you're going to be a lot better off. And if you're just looking at all this guidance, we got to have somebody who's called the CISO, and then you just bring them in and go, okay, go do your thing. That's really not the way to do it. You need to interview them, make sure that they know what you need them to know, and that they are able to achieve the outcome that you want. And
kind of talking about your old battles, bullet point there, Mike. A lot of it is around biases. We all develop subconscious bias to things. I worked with an individual once. No matter what type of threat or risk popped up, they swore it was grizzly stuff, because they dealt with grizzly stuff once years in the past, and so everything moving forward for them is grizzly stuff. So it's important that we identify those biases, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Grizzly stuff. Okay. All right. So here's just a few tips, and this is just kind of what we've been saying and packaged in a different way. So has the candidate ever been the top of an organization, whether or not it's a virtualized version or if it is, the actual CISO? Does this person have that kind of experience? Because if they do, then they've run into all of these things. I need to work across silos. I need to make sure that we are developing a culture of security here, and that it's top of mind for everybody all the time. Right? Use analogies, right? You wouldn't answer your phone if you don't know the number that's calling. You need to treat the internet talking to you the same way. And, being able to get knowledge across like that in a way that people understand without all the secret handshake language. Experience in your sector, very important. We talked about that, especially if you're regulated. Communication skills. You should really ask for a writing sample. And you should really ask them to speak about risk in business terms, right? When somebody comes in and they start, it's all about scary Russian cyber buffer overflow, SQL injection, criminal gangs. That's not the way to talk about it. That is not the way to talk about it. We have, 1 million records in a database that meet the description of personally identifiable information. We know it costs about $200 a record to clean up. If those are exposed, that will be followed by a class action suit. You have a potential of $200 million in liability here. We have some gaps around the controls that protect these data. For $50,000, we can cut that risk in half, and you get $100 million in risk reduction for an outlay of $50,000 spent on investing in controls. That's the way to talk. That is the way to have that business discussion, and you need to expect that, right? We can talk about cyber risk in business and dollar terms. Specific regulatory requirements, again, do they have experience in your sector, and have they been through, for example, if you're in the energy sector and you contribute 300 megawatts of power to the bulk electric system, then you are under the NERC SIPs, the Critical Infrastructure Protection Standards. You need to know things like that. If you take 6 million or more credit card transactions a year, you are a level 1 merchant. You're eBay. Congratulations. All of these nuances around the regulatory requirements need to be pretty clear and explainable from a candidate. And I think, importantly, has your candidate ever taken an organization through an audit? Because the culmination of all of these things, getting all of these things in place and getting them to be durable and repeatable, you're going to have to expose that to somebody someday. And it may be in the context of an audit because you are regulated, or it may be in the context of your insurance company sending in the smoke jumpers with Q-tips and toothpicks if you have a security event and you were insured, and they're going to go check your work and make sure that everything was in place. So making sure that your candidate has taken somebody through an audit is a real good qualification to look for.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I think that's a definite huge quotable right there. So we have some really great questions inside of our chat. Thank you, everyone who has already contributed. We still have time. Please add your questions and we will get to them. Question that we have here from Mark is, what does a vCISO's job description look like? And I know that we've talked about some of the things to be on the lookout for, some of the things you want to be considering when you're looking at what to encourage or discourage. But if you were to give this in a sound bite, Brad, what would your soundbite be for what a job description would look like?
I think a lot of it is going to be around experience. You don't want somebody learning on the job. So I think being very specific in what you're looking for. You hear a lot of people talk about purple squirrels, oh, we're trying to hire a unicorn or a purple squirrel. A lot of folks will not be 100% honest on their resumes, or they'll apply for roles that they meet 80% of the requirements of. So make sure to list what your key requirements are, and then make sure that they meet those requirements. I think experience is a big one. And I think having the ability to communicate with different teams, different groups. If you have somebody that's been locked in a room doing IT stuff all their lives, they might not be as good at communicating with senior leadership, for example, or with the board or with the public. If they are the ones of, knock on wood, hopefully it never happens, but if and when you do have a breach, and they have to go in front of, the media, for example, make sure that they can walk and chew gum at the same time, kind of. So,
yeah.
Mike, did you add anything to that?
Yeah, what I would like to say is, have an idea about the outcome that you want, and talk very specifically to your candidate in your job description about what your expectation is. It may just be a role that does nothing more than performs a risk assessment and manages the corrective action plan and reports to the board of directors. That can be it. It may be that you have a very expansive list to go through, and you want them to conduct weekly meetings with vulnerability management so that you can pitch things over the fence to the desktop team or the server team to get things patched, things like that. They may want you to take an active role in incident response and lead incident response teams. Again, I come from the public sector and I used to work in an emergency operations center. There's a very defined way that you handle incidents from the emergency management perspective. And so there's an incident management team that designates a response team, and that response team then funnels information up at some cadence back to the management team. And so, making sure that you are part of that management team and have one hand in the response team, that may be what this organization wants. They want to know that incidents are going to be handled quickly and they're going to be documented well, because people are going to come look for those papers later. So have an idea of the outcomes, and then that lets you create a job description that's very aligned with what you want to get out of an engagement like that.
Thank you, Mike. Brad, I know that we had been chatting here in side chat about the security culture and building a culture of security within an organization. As a vCISO, do you feel like in your role that you have had experience where you have been charged with helping foster that sense of security, conversations, building that within the organization, or is that something that you lean on a partner inside the organization for?
I think it really depends on the organization. Some of the organizations that I've vCISO'd for, they've already had a trusted advisor, if you will, to the organization that's already in place. My goal is to assist the organization. I'm not there to replace anybody. I'm not there to make a lot of waves with the culture if the culture is already good. If it's not broken, don't fix it type of thing. We've had other organizations where they have had no culture really at all, and so then we'll take the lead on building that out. We want to be transparent. We want to be trustworthy. We want to be honest with folks. And I think that's really the key thing. Make sure that everybody knows they can come to me. I don't care if you are the CEO or if you are one of the folks that comes around at night and empties the trash. Anybody that sees something that has a security concern should be able to come to whoever the vCISO is or whoever that trusted advisor within the organization is and bring their concerns without fear of retribution or being mocked or anything like that. So it's very important. If something's already there, leverage that, build it, grow it. If there's not something there, figure out what is going to work best for the company. And don't do this in a silo. Talk to other teams. Hey, what keeps you awake at night? What do you think would make security better here? And then take that information and build something great.
Mike, any thoughts on that?
Can you ask the question again?
So we're talking about being able to really look at how involved that security culture is for that vCISO. Like, is that the responsibility of the vCISO, or is that the responsibility of somebody internally?
Yeah, well, so I agree with Brad. You got to work with, what you have there. And there may be somebody that's, like they're a learning management system, something like that they've already put in place and they're doing their, and I just think security awareness training is so dippy. The way it's kind of been, packaged by these LMS systems, and you see the same thing every time, and that's not as useful. So in my case, I would probably step into that and revise that to be more like examples that you see in your daily life and what you see at home, frankly, and talk about those things, because trying to connect that to people's real lives, that gives them more of a stake in this, we'll say, right? So developing that culture. And I'll say this too, somebody else brought this up, and I think it was Justin, but it's good to be, and this is a little flip, but a bit of a comedian, because if you want people to remember what you say, it's good if it's 50% stand-up comedy. And that is really the way I have found to get information to be, sticky with people. And I'll say again, if there's somebody there that's already tasked with doing things like this, it's better to work with that person and not come up with your own plan on how you're going to, make all the employees aligned with security. My suggestion and what I've done before is, the daily news blast that we put out. I was working with an organization, actually San Antonio, Virginia, you're in Texas. And what we did was made sure that everybody on the team was getting the daily news blast, and then that was made available internally just by automating putting that on a webpage. And so everybody knew every day you could go 5 minutes, here's what's going on, and reinforcing the lexicon, letting people in on all our weird secret handshake language, again, vests them more, gives them more of a stake in this. And so, if there are things there that are in place, use them. If there's nothing in place, start getting creative.
So we have a few direct messages here. So how long does it typically take to achieve an outcome like risk assessment or corrective action for a budget or a plan? Mike, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah. So so it depends on how you do it. And whether or not it's conducted against very specific regulatory requirements, or if you're just going to use a standard of practice like the NIST cyber framework. It does not take long to just self-assess, sit down with people, ask questions, gather information, populate, your tool. But remember, what you're doing could be inspected later on by someone who comes in after an event, and that information's got to be accurate. And so there are things that you need to prove, and it's good to require an artifact that proves it. And maybe that's just a link to here's where we keep this stuff. But it's it can happen very quickly. But if you're going to be thorough, and this is going to be something that could potentially be inspected later, right? Because you want to use it for your corrective action plan, so that you're on this road to get all these things done. But if there's inaccurate information there, and that's found out later on, remember there is this Civil War era statute called the False Claims Act. And the Federal Trade Commission is vigorously enforcing the False Claims Act. So any pronouncements you make, especially if they're public facing about security, have got to be accurate when the time comes for your claims to be inspected. And more, these events are foreseeable. You can only buy down risk so much. Somebody's going to pick up a USB stick in a bathroom or a parking lot and jack it into a machine, and off we go. And when they come in to find out how did that happen, they're going to go through all your work. And so if you were going to be thorough like that, it's going to take longer. You could probably do it inside a week, with the assistance of teams inside an organization. If they sit you down, you're alone, and all you have is 2 IT people to work with, it probably is going to be a whole lot of just based on everybody's claims, but you got to try. Yeah, Mike. Yeah, that's right. I was a young man in 1863. Yeah. You're just going to have to make sure what's in there is accurate. And so depending on that accuracy level that you need and whether or not you think it's going to be inspected later, that's what's going to dilate this process. But, you can do it in a week.
So
I think a lot of it too. Oh, God.
Please go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say, I think it depends a lot too on which framework are you assessing towards. Are you assessing towards HIPAA, or are you doing a full FedRAMP? And it also depends a lot on the client. I've had some clients that have done assessments for, and they said, we're locking everybody in a room for 2 full 8-hour days. And we had all of our interviews done in 2 days. Other times, Dave and Sarah are on vacation. They'll be back in 3 weeks. So, it takes longer based on the availability of folks and how ready you are for that assessment. If it takes you a week to go find the documentation that we're looking for versus, I've got it right here, it's ready to go, that's also going to add some time to that assessment.
Thank you, Brad. While you're going, I'm going to have you answer another question for me. How long should someone plan to have a vCISO?
So typically, I would recommend at least a year, and then it depends. Or have you accomplished all of your goals? It really depends. As Mike mentioned earlier, you set your goals. What are your goals for this vCISO engagement, right? If you've accomplished those goals, then you're golden. If you still have some more work to do, or you've identified other new goals that you want to achieve, we've had some clients, we've had some clients that have had us, just using CI as an example, as vCISOs for 4 years now, because they keep coming up with new projects and new goals that they want to achieve. And as we achieve all these goals, they come up with new ones. It really depends on your organization and what your specific goals are. So I would say at least a year, but it can go as long as you find it to be beneficial to your organization.
Fantastic. I've got our last question here, Mike. I'm going to punt this one to you. So does the vCISO provide any protection from the claims of executive negligence that we've been seeing in the news?
Ooh.
I knew you'd like that one.
Kudos to whoever asked that question. So this is a nuanced answer. So yes, because you've incorporated someone into your organization who is managing this, facilitating security, making sure that executives are present when we discuss identified risk and the disposition, avoid, accept, mitigate through controls, transfer through insurance, and we've all got agreement on that. There is a bit of liability protection there, specifically against these claims of negligence, right? Because you pull the executives into this and you're doing what you're supposed to do, and this is especially important if you're a publicly traded organization. The converse is also true. I've worked in organizations before where you just could not, this was a long time ago, but you just could not get executives at the table, right? It's like, look, we hired you, go do it. Then there is no protection there, because what we're hearing is they want governance all the way up to the board level now. And if you have been unsuccessful in pulling everybody in up to that level and being able to conduct briefings, quarterly board meetings, even if it's contribution of a couple of slides where you're talking about, well, here's the results of our risk assessment, or here's how we've decreased our vulnerabilities, things like that. If those things are not showing up in board slides, then there is this potential for this claim of negligence. So the answer is yes and no. Now, if the question is, hey, we hired this guy, he was making all the decisions, or she was making all the decisions, and so when this thing happened, it's on him or her. No, there is no. That's not protecting you. That's gonna fall right back on you, the organization, because you were not a part of the decisions that had to be made about risk.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for joining me today. Thank you to our audience for coming and attending. Would like to tell you really quickly about Critical Insight. Mike, will you show our wheel of services?
Sure. So this is not comprehensive, but I will tell you, I'll encapsulate this by saying that Critical Insight provides a range of both professional and managed services that in aggregate form an entire security program, everything you could need to outsource, or periodic things that need to be ticked off the compliance list. We're there for all of them. We'll break into your network. We'll kick the bad guys out of your network. We'll handle your risk assessment. We'll give you a vCISO if you want one. So it's really about a combination of managed and professional services, all having to do with cybersecurity.
And we'd love for you to stay connected with us. And we're going to be sending out a survey that you're going to get inside of your email. Please take it for us. We provide a donation at the end of the year for everybody. Thanks for you taking our survey. We make a charitable donation. And we'd like you to stay connected. We have the daily IT security news blast, which is curated by Mike Hamilton. We also have free monthly security awareness trainings. And the next one's coming up on June 21st. So save the date. And as you can see in the chat, my colleague Ellie Miller has already put that SurveyMonkey link inside of there. Please take that survey. We also host regular online urgent panel webinars and podcasts. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Pisces, please check it out at piscesinternational.org.
Yep.
That's about it for us today. Please stay in touch. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions about vCISO, you have 2 different email addresses here to contact us. Thank you. Final thoughts, Mike, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I hope this has been useful information, because this vCISO thing is all over the place. Everybody's holding up their hand saying, we do this. I hope we've been able to set some expectations for everyone as to what you should want out of an engagement like this. And hopefully everybody gets on the path to security like we're all supposed to. And billions and billions and billions of dollars quit leaving the country, and hospitals quit getting knocked over.
Thanks, Mike. Brad?
Yeah, everything that Mike said. Plus, don't be afraid if you're looking at getting a vCISO, or if you're looking at getting, assessment services or any kind of security service from a third party, us included. Make sure you ask those hard questions. Don't softball stuff in. You're paying for a service. Everybody markets vCISO a little bit differently. Make sure you know exactly what you're getting. Don't be afraid to ask those hard questions during scoping calls and things like that. It's your money. Our goal is for you to keep as much of that money as you can, not to have it sent out to Russia or China or anywhere like that. So ask those questions. Make sure that you're staying safe out there. And as always, thanks for attending our webinar today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.